Hi there, Glyn here with a newsletter subscriber only video for you, and this one is all about dodging and burning in Lightroom, which up until fairly recently I've always done in Photoshop using a grey layer, a blend mode and the dodge and burn tools. But I've discovered a new way that I feel is much better and offers much more control, and like I say, it's all done within Lightroom. Okay, so here in Lightroom I have this grey sphere. However, if I turn off the masking, you can see that it's actually just a grey circle, and the reason it has shape is purely down to the highlights and shadows, the light and dark areas, with the light areas appearing closer and the dark areas appearing further away. Now this is done using dodging and burning, and this is how I do it in Lightroom. I'll turn off these masks. Then first of all I'll click to create a mask and I'll choose a brush. This one will be the dodge brush for the lightening. By default in the brush settings the flow is at 100, so I'll put that back. You can see that the feather is at 100, which is exactly what I want it to be. Next I'll come to the light section and the exposure slider, and the settings I initially use are to go +1 stop, which I can change later if I want to. Now with the settings as they are, if I apply a brushstroke, what we get is a brightening in that area of 1 stop, 100% of what I set the exposure slider to. However, in dodging and burning we need to be much more gentle and gradually build the effect up, because some areas we want to be affected more than others. So I don't want it to behave like this, so I'll delete it, and now I'll create the dodge brush, but this time in the brush settings I'll bring down the flow to 20%. And again increase the exposure to +1 stop. Now when I use the brush the effect isn't so strong, but the more I go over and over the same area, it adds to it. So with the first brush stroke it's 20% of the actual exposure setting. When I go over it again, it becomes 40% of the exposure setting, and so on. And having this gives a lot of control. So I'll just add some lightning or some highlights into these areas here. Now I'll rename this brush Dodge and in brackets Lighten. Now for the burn or the darken brush. So I'll click to create a new mask and choose a brush. The brush settings I keep the same with the feather at 100 and the flow at 20%, but this time I take the exposure to -1 stop to darken down this area at the bottom. I'll rename it Burn and in brackets Darken. And if I want to, I can click on the dodge or burn masks and adjust the exposure slider to get it exactly how I want. And now, just by lightening and darkening areas, the grey circle has shape, depth and has become a sphere. Now in this portrait here we can see the natural ripples in the black t-shirt, which we know are folds purely because of the highlights and shadows that make them. The light areas coming forward and the dark areas going back. Now because they are just highlights and shadows, I can actually make more ripples using dodging and burning. So I'll go to the masking section and click to create a mask and choose a brush. Brush settings are fine, and this one will be for the dodging, so I'll increase the exposure by +1 stop. I'll make the brush a bit smaller by using the left square bracket key, and then just add a few strokes going down here on this part of the t-shirt. I'll rename this mask Dodge. Next, the burn brush. So I click to create a new mask. I choose a brush and set the exposure to -1 stop, and then brush a few times either side of the area that I painted with the dodge brush. So where we have a highlight, either side of it we have a shadow, and this creates the depth. I'll rename this one Burn. And now look, when I turn the masks off and on, see how it actually looks like another ripple in the t-shirt material. So let's now look at how I use this technique on a portrait. In this portrait here, if I turn off and on the masking section, look at the difference it makes. Okay, so first of all then, I'll delete all of the masks. Then, starting from scratch, I'll wait for Lightroom to recognize that there is a person in this picture. And when it does, we have this thumbnail, which I then click on and can now create masks of different parts with just one click. I'm going to first of all work on the eyes, so I'll click on the iris and pupil mask and then create. I'll rename the mask Eyes. And then increase the exposure a touch, but the magic happens in the effects section. I'll adjust the dehaze, which works a treat. And then add in some clarity and a little bit of texture. And this is before and after. So subtle, but definitely improves the eyes. All right, so now the dodging and burning. I'll start with the dodge brush and then simply start adding brush strokes over areas of the face I want to bring forward or to make stand out. I'll add a bit of a highlight on her forehead. And one down her nose, in this part above her eyes. I'll brush over the cheek to make that even more prominent. And also lighten this area here, this lighting pattern. I'll also zoom in and brighten these parts of the eyes too. So the bottom of the eyelid. And then on the iris. I'll rename it Dodge. And this is the before and after. And all of this I'm doing quickly, but you get the idea. Next, the burn brush. So I create a new mask, choose a brush, and set exposure to -1 stop. And now I brush over areas that I want to appear further back, or areas next to highlights I added to emphasize the shape. So down the side of the nose. Also this area here where the lighting has kind of removed the definition of the cheek, so I need to add that in. There's before and after. Now I'll just go round certain areas of the face to give them more shape by darkening the shadow areas. I'll also go around the outside of the iris to make it more defined. So this is before and after. I think I might darken those areas more by simply lowering the exposure a bit. I'll also brush around the hairline and the jaw. All right, I reckon that's enough. So this is before and this is after. And I'll just rename the mask Burn. And this is zoomed out to 100%. Lastly, I'll just show you a couple of other images that have already had the dodging and burning applied. First of all, this one here of my friend Foxy. Look how when I turn the masking off and on, you can see the impact that dodging and burning has had on his face, giving it much more depth and shape. And then there's this black and white portrait here where only a little has been done, but you can see how it has improved the light on his face. So there you go, that's how I now dodge and burn my images using Lightroom and not Photoshop like I always used to. I do find that this way just gives me way more control. But that is all for this newsletter subscriber only video, so I hope it's been useful. But do keep an eye out for future newsletters, as I do intend to do much more of these subscriber only videos. And on that note, if there's anything in particular that you'd like me to cover in a video, just drop me a reply. Thanks for subscribing.